Ciao everybody, I am Renato Floris, the proud publisher of all the scholarly and entertaining books about Rudolph Valentino and Natasha Rambova by Evelyn Zumaya. I'm here today with Evelyn to discuss more about her fascinating work. Ciao, Evelyn.
Ciao, Renato. I've been mulling over this week's Rudolph Valentino topic of discussion and have synthesized several ideas into one. And this being a discussion of Valentino's personal tastes and their complications, because some of his personal tastes did cause his brief life to complicate, and some still present problematic discussions about him today. So where to begin on this subject? A discussion of the personal tastes of one Rudolph Valentino. I'm going to begin with his tastes for food. A perfect topic to discuss with you, my Italian husband and gourmet five-star Italian chef.
Thank you very much.
For me, the most notable reference to Valentino's obvious penchant for the food of his homeland, pasta, was revealed by a remark made by his second wife, Natasha Rambova, shortly after they separated in August of 1925. I will not be understating it when I say their parting was a furious and bitter one. We've talked about that in some previous episodes, but when Rambova arrived in New York City after leaving Hollywood and after her husband Rudy sent her packing, she called a press conference. She prepared for that press conference by having a table set up with letters laid strewn about where she made the announcement that she was going to write a tell-all book about her life with Rudolph Valentino. With the news of their separation making headlines every day then, this was a breaking story for the press. So imagine their reaction. Now, the young Natasha was very wounded and very angry, and I will add, defeated. And she proceeded, according to reports, to tell the press that one contributing factor to her separation from the Sheik was that she was sick and tired of eating his spaghetti.
I know. This is something you can relate to, because Italians eat pasta almost every day, and that is the primo piatto, first dish for many Italians, and for many others is the only one. Always a special pasta with a unique sauce, such as pesto, the marinara, carbonara, amatriciana, and so on. For America, this is not the case. For all the Italian, the pasta is a daily dish, the first one, because, as you know, the Italian meal is composed of different dishes, starting from the antipasto, then the primo, secondo con contorno, formaggi, frutta, dolce, caffè, and push coffee, a liquor. So, I mean appetizer, first and second course, with a side dish, cheese curls, fruit, dessert, coffee, and the liquor. Being Rudolph Valentino a true Southern Italian, he could not miss his daily pasta dish.
Well, although it is impossible not to eat your pasta, Renato, you could eat it every day, every single day. But as petty as Natasha Rambova's remarks seem, ever since I read that bitter little side note she made to the press, I've thought about it in a different light. But I still have a problem thinking she would even say that. But perhaps she did. What's the expression? Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Now, in thinking about those meals of spaghetti at Falcon Lair, in Valentino's household records, his gray books, and I add that transcripts from those gray books were included in the court records I recovered and sourced in Affairs Valentino. But those ledgers were where Valentino's closest friend and business manager, George Ullman, itemized Falcon Lair's expenses, and quite a good deal of money was recorded under the heading of Italian stores, with purchases of sometimes up to $185, which by today's purchasing power times 13 would have been over $2,000. So I'm sure some pasta was being served up by the Falcon Lair cook.
For that money you can buy a lot of pasta, for sure.
There are reports of Valentino cooking, and he posed for the image we used for this episode. And I'm going to allege it was posed, because of your analysis of that image, Renato. You have some comments on that picture of him cooking that spaghetti.
Yes, I do, because this is ridiculous. No Italian in any province of Italy could cook long spaghetti like that in such a small pot.
Well, you handed me your response to that image of Valentino with his mile-long spaghetti, and I'm going to just read it verbatim as you wrote it, and I quote, "Spaghetti for the world means Italy, but as you know, Italy is composed by 20 regions starting from the very north at the Austrian, Swiss, and French border to the very south and Puglia, Calabria, and Sicily. And if there are 20 regions, there are at least 200 kinds of pasta, and we can say the same thing about sausages. The famous spaghetti originated in Naples, and in the 1800s they were about 4 feet 1 inch long and curved halfway, but after the evolution of the producing techniques they were just 3 feet 3 inches long, always curved halfway. The problem with all those lengths is that to cook them you need incredibly deep pans, and for that reason they used to break the long spaghetti to have them correctly cook. Now, with the current length of 9.8 inches, it is not necessary to break the pasta anymore." And you concluded this piece by writing, "Anyway, there still are some old Italian chefs who still break the pasta in 2 parts. Once I asked to a grandma why she was doing that, and she replied to me, 'My mom did it this way, my grandma did it this way, and so I do it this way.'" End quote. I will add that in the image of Valentino with his pasta, that kettle is nowhere deep enough to boil pasta.
Oh, no.
So there's also the subject of the sauce recipe, where it is claimed this is what Valentino put on top of his spaghetti. This is a recipe that is posted online as something sacred. We have our doubts on that too. And after watching Italians cook their sauces here, I 100% debunk that ridiculous recipe. Valentino would never commit such culinary blasphemy.
Yes, I read somewhere that supposed secret Valentino pasta recipe, and I believe was so secret that even he didn't know it. And I can say that the recipe is the invention of somebody who knows very, very little about Italian food. It is some crazy Italian-American idea. Putting together all those ingredients in a terrible mess of texture and tastes is incredibly not Italian. It appears to be more than one recipe. It looks more like a kind of culinary Frankenstein recipe of a sum of at least 5 or 6 different pasta sauces.
I think the subject of Valentino's pasta sauce recipe is one of the fine examples of the devotion of Valentino's fans, because the very subject of that alleged spaghetti sauce recipe can be a contentious one, as are so many subjects about Valentino, some revering that spaghetti sauce recipe and even reverently adhering to each ingredient, but others doubt it, which we do. The entire subject was brought forth, I believe, by the gossip columnist Hedda Hopper, who worked with Valentino as an actress, and she claimed he put anchovies in his spaghetti sauce, and I quote, "that just melted away," end quote.
Disgust.
I know you found it amusing that the recipe just calls for Italian sausage as an ingredient, because in Italy there are at least 200 kinds of sausages, starting from the Hirschfartwurst from the northeastern region of Trento to the sausage of Bra, which we really liked so much,
Yes.
to the Pasqualorda sausage of Sicily, or the Sardinian Trigoli. So, as you commented, to say simply Italian sausage is nonsense to any Italian. So, if this was his recipe, maybe there were other reasons why Natasha made that crack about being so sick of his spaghetti. Maybe if he was making the sauce, it tasted, well, maybe not so great. Anyway, when not eating in, I'm sure Valentino made many Italian restaurant owners thrilled with his regular patronage. His personal taste in restaurants was well known. And I have to give an affectionate nod to Musso and Frank's on Hollywood Boulevard, which is still there and has been since 1919. Valentino often ate there, and the old Hollywood Musso and Frank's legacy is fabulous. And I just have to tell listeners, if they have not made a pilgrimage there, they must go. Whenever we're in Los Angeles, we have a few meals there and some of their fabulous martinis. But on the subject of Valentino's eateries, I'm going to read a passage from an article that I found that appeared in the New Movie magazine in 1929, written by the journalist Herb Howe. He was interviewing Natasha about her life as Valentino's wife. It's a great piece, a great article, and I'm including it in its entirety in the new book, by the way. But I just love the description of Valentino entering this small Italian eatery in New York, which was called the Vesuvio, where he and Natasha met Herb Howe for dinner. And I quote, "Passing the Vesuvio, an obscure little Italian restaurant in the basement of a brownstone front directly behind the Capitol Theater in New York, I was stopped by gusts of memory. It was here I often lunched and dined with Rudy Valentino, who with characteristic sentiment remained loyal to the place long after fame offered him its caviar. Memory drawn, I turned and went down the few steps to the arched entrance beneath the stairs that led to the floor above. The one window of the place gazed at me lifelessly, shrouded in curtains, a little soiled. Faint eddies of dust whirled on the stone pavement in the corner by the door, as if they were also seeking entrance. A few folded papers, soggy and stained and dead, lay there. Across the arched opening, under the stairs, an iron lattice grating had been drawn so that the vestibule to the inner door was dark and hollow like a tomb. The grating was padlocked. It, too, was gone. In the still dreariness, I recalled our last evening there. I had come alone to dine on the good but cheap table d'hôte. There were several diners in the place, mostly Italians, and their girls. I took a small table by the kitchen door where I could exchange words with the plump signora, who emerged steaming from time to time to look over her guests. I had come to know her through Rudy. He always exchanged banter and Italian compliments with her. The waiter was in the act of placing my plate of minestrone when a hush fell on the room like a stroke of paralysis. The plate of soup remained suspended beneath my nose, as though the waiter had turned to bronze, and the spoons and forks of the other diners were similarly transfixed in mid-air. The whole room was stricken by the opening of that outer door. "Buona sera," called the husky voice of the signora, coming out of the kitchen to greet these arrivals. "Buona sera, signora, come stai?" boomed the reply. And then the same voice, "Hello, Herb, come have dinner with us." Rudy had entered, working his usual spell, and with him Natasha, his wife, and Natasha's white-haired aunt, to whom Rudy was so devoted that in his last will he named her affectionately a beneficiary. I moved to their table and tried to feel at ease among the surrounding waxworks. Rudy never appeared conscious of stares. He enjoyed attention and accepted it with lusty naturalness, where other stars are rendered coyly artificial. The other people in the restaurant recognized the Valentinos, of course, but their eyes, the only mobile parts left to them, turned queryingly on me. I spilled my soup with hands that behaved as if in husking mittens. Apparently my identity had to be explained to spare me the inconvenience of developing apoplexy. "If they don't stop staring," I said, "my complexion ripening to mauve, I shall arrive and announce I'm the late John Bunny staging a comeback." Rudy released a hearty guffaw, and the diners thawed. The dinner went merrily with Natasha's wit. Rudy had a huge appetite for humor as well as for food. That was our last dinner of vivid memory. End quote. So I think we've talked about Valentino and his pasta long enough, but before we leave the subject of his gastronomic tastes, one brief comment has to be made about his choice of beverage, Renato. Again, back to the household expense records included in that court-ordered audit file. The liquor bill. Money paid to those loyal bootleggers. We've broken that down in previous episodes, but it was obvious his first choice of beverage was wine, beer, a distant second.
You asked me this past week to write something about Valentino's taste in clothing from an Italian point of view, and I gave you a statement.
Well, you did, and thank you. And I'm going to read it here, and I quote, "Valentino started out his life as a difficult boy who in his junior high school in Perugia was expelled because he tried to stab a classmate who was bullying him, saying he had pointed ears. This was revealed in a Valentino conference held in 2016 and mentioned by Alessandro Tinteri. Because of this, perhaps Valentino placed more emphasis on his appearance and his manner of dress and behavior. In later years, he became what they call in Italy a gaga, which means a young man who shows off a genteel elegance in speaking and behaving and dressing, posing as a great lord without the means to be one. So Valentino was surely a true Southern Italian Gaga, and not just able to choose the best of the best in his fashion, but he was making the fashion. He loved the English tailors, but his fabrics were always those precious ones from Biella here in Piedmont. His hat, the best possible fedora, the Borsalino, was made from beaver fur here in Alessandria, end quote. So, I was discussing this episode with a friend who is a remarkable Valentino scholar, and I so liked their summation about this subject that I'm going to cite it as a good introduction. After recalling the tale of Valentino once borrowing $10 from his friend Doug Gerard to buy a pair of patent leather shoes for an interview, they wrote me with the following commentary, and I quote, "He, Valentino, rather starved himself in favor of a new suit or shirt. Yes, his London shoemakers and tailors must have loved him. As he states, they came in droves to his hotel when he first came to London in 1923. His cigarettes, shaving cream, canes, hats, etc. were always of the latest fashion. He was a style icon when that word was still in its infancy." End quote. And on the subject of the watch, which he favored, which he can even be seen wearing in The Son of the Sheik, this was his Cartier Tank wristwatch. I was surprised to learn that this was a new gadget produced by Cartier in the late teens, and I was also surprised researching this to learn that wristwatches were originally a military invention, designed to allow military personnel to be able to see the time without having to take one hand to remove a pocket watch. But Valentino wearing his tank watch would cause a furor for sure in mainstream male America, and his watch no doubt stands, at least in my opinion, as his most iconic fashion influence. Even though a rougher version of the wristwatch was being used by the military, the designer fashion version of the wristwatch was then in the 1920s considered a lady's bracelet. Men favored carrying a pocket watch, and that was that. Valentino loved the latest in anything smart, though, and I have to think if he were around today, he would no doubt be wearing the world's most expensive smartwatch. And the stunning fact that Valentino not only wore a Cartier tank watch, was that he also wore a platinum slave bracelet, that infamous Christmas gift from Natasha. Yes, he was most definitely, as the saying goes, wearing his wealth. One other item he wore that's worth mentioning could be his Converse sneakers. The discussion should be had someday about his marketing of these name brands, whether he was consciously or unconsciously acting as a spokesperson for the things he wore. I think it's also worth mentioning that when I interviewed the family of Valentino's godfather, Frank Manillo, his grandson and daughter-in-law, one of the first things they told me was how Frank's first order of business when Valentino arrived in New York City was to take him to his personal tailor to have a suit made. So Valentino landed in full wardrobe. And they also recalled Frank telling them how his advice to the teenage Rudy was to, quote, always wear a pair of spotless spats. But what is up with spats, Renato? How difficult it must have been to keep those spats Frank Manillo spotless. But Valentino's casual attire was equally as natty. The +4 and +2 knickers, which according to George Ullman, they all wore to sporting events such as the Friday night boxing matches. And according to Ullman, there was one other accessory, if you want to call that Valentino wore or hid. This was his concealed and loaded handgun. Both he and Ullman began carrying revolvers concealed after a few unsettling incidents with fans. Apart from this obviously problematic hidden gun on Valentino, in addressing other troublesome aspects of his personal taste, I think they were twofold. One, that he had such expensive tastes that he went deep into debt, especially during the last months of his life. And two, his influence over young men's fashions was paramount. They emulated his every statement, and this to the horror of the older, more conservative male establishment. But really, a description of the beautiful Rudolph, set for any public appearance, as a culmination of his personal taste, presents the following profile. He appears in an expensive custom-tailored suit, a colorful shirt, tie, Borsalino hat, spotless spats, shoes, wearing a Cartier tank watch, a platinum slave bracelet, after a shave with his imported English shaving soap, and all while carrying a concealed and loaded handgun. As far as pushing the envelope in men's fashions, I think he could scarcely have taken it any further. And this presents the problem of the manifestation of that horror by the mainstream male population. In the opinion of conservative male America then, that every last detail of his clothing, appearance, and influence became fodder for a campaign of heavy attacks against him. Now, these efforts to insult, demean, diffuse, and belittle him in the eyes of America's youth primarily had a terrible effect on him. Valentino suffered for his freedom and fashion, if that is the way to put it. I often think today how few men appreciate Rudolph Valentino for his fashion-forward bravery then. He was a trendsetter and got so little acknowledgement for that historically, I think. Of course, his eclectic style in that day riled his threatened opponents, and they lashed out with accusations of effeminacy. This could be a subject for another podcast episode, truly, but for the purposes of this episode, I think it's accurate to say that all of the name-calling, those headlines associating Valentino with effeminacy, is historical evidence of a concerted effort to diffuse his popularity. Of course, it was a much different social climate than today, but wielding the word effeminacy is such stereotyping that it demonstrates tremendous ignorance and even hostility. But I think this stereotype still exists today when some people think of Rudolph Valentino. Because fact, the ancient, and as I just said, ignorant stereotypes that both Valentino and Rambova were the target of are still proposed by some today.
Well, here in Italy it was never like that so much, and I think that was Valentino's motivation, and the reason for his personal style of dressing was not so unusual at all here.
Still in America, Renato, in the 1920s, when Valentino was tagged as being effeminate and an effeminate influence, such as in the article published in the Oregonian during the Mineral Lava Tour in June of 1923, where he was referred to as, and I quote, a model for effeminate lads. In any case, he was the victim of this association fallacy, or guilt by association. It did not matter whether it was a good or a bad thing to be effeminate then. In the 1920s, for a woman or a man, the fact was it was used as a slur and a hostile act to make Valentino suffer what he felt to be a tremendous indignity and wrong. The phrase association fallacy, as part of our discussion today, is by definition an irrelevant association, and often by appealing to emotions, that states that qualities of one thing are inherently qualities of another. Two types of association fallacies are sometimes referred to as guilt by association or honor by association. So the point I'm making here is that in alleging that Valentino's personal tastes in clothing and apparel were effeminate and that he was an effeminate influence, the association is made that this is a bad thing, and the intent was to make him less than something, less of a man, socially wrong, and inappropriate. Effeminacy was then reserved for women. Beauty had but one gender, and a man displaying beauty was, well, then extremely threatening to the dowdy, brown-suited, stuffy American man. When feeling threatened, people tend to resort to name-calling, and in this case, Valentino was called effeminate, therefore presumed to be bad. But I think, fashion-wise, instead of being bad, Valentino was actually pretty badass. But I know I do not have to remind our knowledgeable listeners how Valentino died anguishing over the infamous pink powder puff editorial, which levied all blame for some pink powder machines in men's bathrooms in Chicago to his influence. Obviously, if this caused him so much sorrow, which has been documented, then all of the other attempts to demean him because of his great fashion taste would too. I, for one, have no doubt he suffered a great deal as a result of the stereotyping and the vicious association fallacies. Truthfulness, in my opinion, has not been of much importance in the Valentino world until now, because I'm demanding it, I guess. Truth about Valentino, truth about my work on him, truth about his beloved queen Natasha Rambova. She might not have loved his spaghetti, but she did love him. And I'm pleased to say more on their love story will be forthcoming very soon, because I have completed the new book, and it is currently in production. And I will announce that real soon, and hope I wrote something intriguing, because I sure found it so.
Well, for today we have covered a lot, and I hope readers will read the only book they should read on Rudolph Valentino, I mean Affairs Valentino, and all the other wonderful books I have published. Beyond Valentino, The Infancy of the Myth, Daydream, and Affairs Valentino Companion Guide, and in Italian, Affairs Valentino and the Infanzia del Mito.
In closing, today, Renato, I want to thank my dear Valentino scholar for all their insightful commentary and consultation, and for their great contributions to these episodes. In the next few weeks, I will finally be building that online library of my archive on the rudolphvalentino.org site. But meanwhile, check out the AffairsValentino.com for all the links to the social media sites.
Okay, so for today, I want to say to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And for now, Fiat Justitia, Ruat Caelum. And for the nice guys, arrivederci.